Okay, so our thing we're going to talk about is Elizabethan law enforcement, crime, and punishment. So there were a couple laws, but we're gonna start with the more bizarre ones.
So conceiving a child before wedlock or having a kid before marriage was not legal, so you weren't allowed to. Heroes must wear caps. This law requires commoners over the age of 6 to wear a night woolen cap every Sunday and holidays. It was mostly for wealthy people, so rich people. Um, Beard were taxed. So Elizabeth supposedly taxed beer at the rate of 3 shillings or 4 pence for anything that had grown for longer than a fortnight. No, not the game. Periods of 2 weeks. Torture was not allowed with the queen permission. So before torturing someone, you needed to have the queen permission. Needed to go to church. You needed to attend church once a week. She did that to stop the fighting that was going on around about the Catholics and them wanting a reunion with Rome. And Puritan wanted to erase all the Catholics element from church. You also needed a license to beg, so begging during that time was not legal. You needed to have a license for that.
Yeah. So now we're gonna talk about the more serious crimes that had the biggest punishments or more cruel punishments. So we're gonna start with high treason. High treason is when you were disloyal to the crown. If you were like plotting the murder of a sovereign, which is just someone that's royalty, a ruler, or some kind of monarch, or if you like kind of like impose or demand like a war against them. So yeah, or over a territory which they rule. The punishment for the high treason was beheaded. Your head would be placed on a piece of wood, and then the executioner would take either a sword or an axe and, well, chop your head off, as we can see in the image. um, then, after that, they would actually take your head, put it on a piece of steak, not the food, but actually a pointy piece of wood, and they would place it in like public areas like the London Bridge. They did that because they thought like the person was still conscious after death. Yes. Another punishment was being burnt alive. This was known as the worst one because the person was alive through the whole process. Um, they would sometimes feel really guilty, like the executioner would feel really guilty, and they would put gunpowder at the bottom to speed up the process. An example of someone that committed high treason was Mary, the Queen of Scots. She was actually Queen Elizabeth's cousin, and she plotted the murder of Elizabeth. So she was sentenced to prison for 19 years before being found guilty, and then she was beheaded in 1587.
Witchcraft. So people believe it in witch at that time. So spell, magic, all of those stuff. There was a lot of reasons that you could be accused of being a witch. Some of them were being unique, different. So if you had red hair, left-handed, you dress in a different way. Those were reasons. You also had if you were women, sarcastic, too rich or too poor. If you were partially deaf, if your child said so, if you live alone, so most of the people during that time got married, had kids. So if you didn't, you were a witch. If you had pets, especially cats and dog, if you had marks of any sorts like birthmark or stuff like that, you were a witch. Talking to yourself related to a known witch, 40 or over, argumentative. Most accused witch, most people that were accused from witchcraft would be burned alive or hanged.
For the hanging part, there were actually two types. So there was suspension, where they would take the weight of the body and they would take a noose and tie it around your neck, and then the other piece would be tied to a piece of wood, and then they would leave you hanging there until death, which took about like 10 to 20 minutes until you were actually like dead. So you would slowly die of strangulation. Then you also had the short drop, where they would put the accused on a piece on a on a cart pulled by a horse, and then of course they would still have a rope around their neck and the other piece around the wood. Then the object would move, which would leave you hanging. Or they would put the accused on a bench, and the executioner would just kick the bench. So yeah, leave you hanging.
So we have examples for witchcraft. So Rebecca Nurse was one of the oldest one to get accused of witchcraft. She was 71 year old when people asked her if she was a witch, and she failed to respond because she was old and slightly deaf. She didn't hear the question, and they decided to execute her. So yeah. We also have Sarah Good was rated out by her own daughter. Her daughter was 4 year old and said that her mom was a witch, so she got executed because people believe it her daughter. When they believe it, someone was a witch, they would torture them in saying the truth with multiple methods like the dunking stool or being cut. Um, People believe it in witchcraft because they needed a way to explain the unexplainable. Um, though there's a question, why did they think that women were witches, but they didn't think 1 second that men could be warlock?
Another one was murder. So most people would in that time would murder with poison. So one of the punishments was being beheaded. So you got your head chopped off. But the other one was being boiled in oil. So this one was actually for people who committed murder by using poison. So they would usually tie the accused by the hands or the feet, and then they would slowly lower them into this big pot, like cauldron, and that pot was over open flames, and it was filled with oil, and then they would slowly burn to death. This was really bad because, again, they were still alive for the whole process, and they would feel everything. Yeah. Now we have minor crimes and the most common ones as well.
So theft is taking something from a person without their permission. So they would usually steal from pockets or purses. The punishment was whipping. The accused would be tied to a pole um, that would be held by two men, or it was stuck to the ground. The public would often join in this punishment, and the person who got stole from would usually participate too.
The next one is poaching. So, poaching, if you poached at night, you would actually get a punishment, which was you would get hanged either by suspension or a short drop. But if you actually poached during the day, you would only get a jail sentence or even nothing.
So, like we said earlier, begging was illegal. So, if you would beg others to grant you a favor or to like asking for money or stuff like that, it was a crime. Usually, this would be performed by poor people who needed a little bit more help. Punishment was beating, not beaten to death. It was just a bloody beating. If the person didn't stop and continued beating after this, they would be sent to jail or they would be hanged.
So you can see that there's a lot of things that were different from that day to today. They were more cruel, especially back then. Now we don't really have punishments. The only punishment, I guess, you would be sent to jail. We don't really torture people anymore, so yeah. You can see that a lot of like laws especially changed. Like men don't get taxed for their long beards. There's no law against begging. Yeah, and a lot of punishments are very like not exactly cruel in a sort of way. So yeah, that's pretty much it for that.